The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Guard Captain Marcus Sullivan adjusted his ceremonial uniform. 20 years of service had taught him to read crowds like others read books, and today, something felt different. The usual tourist chatter seemed muted, replaced by an electric tension that made his trained instincts hum with alertness. Marcus had started his career as a young soldier in the army. Before joining the Royal Guard, his colleagues often joked that he could sense trouble before it even thought about showing up. Today, that sixth sense was working overtime. The crowd gathered for the changing of the guard ceremony was larger than usual. Faces pressed against the iron gates with an intensity that went beyond mere curiosity. Among the sea of cameras and excited faces, Marcus noticed him immediately. A man in his 30s, standing unusually still while everyone around him jostled for better positions. His hands were buried deep in his jacket pockets, and his eyes never left Marcus. There was something about the way he stood, the rigid posture, the slight tremor in his jaw that triggered every alarm bell in Marcus's experience. The other guards took their positions for the ceremony. Their red uniforms pristine, their movements precise. This was supposed to be routine, a display of tradition and pageantry that happened every day without incident. Tourists would take photos, children would wave, and life would continue as it always had. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. As the ceremony began, Marcus maintained his stoic expression while his eyes continuously swept the crowd. Years of training had taught him to appear relaxed while staying hypervigilant. The mysterious man had moved closer to the front, his position now giving him a clear line of sight to the guards. Marcus noticed the bulge in his jacket, the way his right hand remained hidden. The beads of sweat despite the cool morning air. The crowd pressed closer as the formal inspection began. Cameras flashed and voices rose in excitement, but Marcus's attention remained locked on the potential threat. He had dealt with protesters before, overzealous fans, even the occasional drunk tourist, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. His hand instinctively moved closer to his radio, ready to call for backup at the first sign of real trouble. The man's behavior became increasingly erratic as the ceremony progressed. He kept checking his watch, his breathing becoming more rapid and shallow. Marcus had seen this pattern before during his military service. Someone was building up courage for something significant, something that required overcoming natural fear and hesitation. The question was what, and more importantly, when as the final movements of the ceremony approached, Marcus made a decision that would define not just his day, but possibly his entire career. Instead of completing his routine position change, he deliberately moved himself into a more advantageous spot, one that would give him the best possible response time if his suspicions proved correct. 20 years of experience told him that whatever was about to happen would happen soon. The crowds. Excitement reached its peak as the ceremony neared its climax. Children pointed excitedly, adults raised their phones higher, and the general atmosphere of celebration masked the growing tension that only Marcus seemed to perceive. But he was ready. Whatever came next, he would be ready to respond with the calm professionalism that had defined his entire career in service to the crown. The moment arrived with terrifying suddenness. As the guards completed their final formation, the man Marcus had been watching suddenly broke from the crowd with jerky, desperate movements. His hand emerged from his jacket, and the metallic gleam of a pistol caught the morning sunlight. Screams erupted from the crowd as people realized what they were seeing, but their cries seemed to come from very far away. Time slowed to a crawl as Marcus processed the threat. The gunman's face was twisted with a mixture of fear and determination. His eyes wild with whatever desperation had driven him to this moment. The weapon wavered in his grip, but it was pointed directly at Marcus and his fellow guards. Around them, the crowd began to scatter in panic. Parents grabbing children, tourists dropping expensive cameras in their haste to flee. But Marcus didn't move. Not a single muscle. His training kicked in with automatic precision, flooding his system with controlled calm instead of panic. He had faced armed enemies before during his military deployment, but never surrounded by innocent civilians. Never with so many potential casualties in the immediate vicinity. Running or diving for cover would only create more chaos and potentially provoke the gunman into firing wildly into the crowd. Instead, Marcus did something that stunned everyone present, including his fellow guards. He maintained his ceremonial position, standing at perfect attention as if nothing had changed. His expression remained completely neutral, showing no fear, no anger, no reaction whatsoever to the weapon pointed at his chest. To the crowd, to his colleagues, even to the gunman himself, Marcus appeared almost supernaturally calm. The gunman's voice cracked as he shouted demands, but his words were lost in the chaos of screaming tourists and the sound of people running. Marcus could see the man's hand shaking more violently now, his finger dangerously close to the trigger. This was the most critical moment. Any sudden movement, any sign of aggression or fear, could turn this confrontation into a tragedy that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Behind his calm exterior, Marcus's mind was working at lightning speed. He calculated distances, assessed escape routes for civilians, and monitored the positions of his fellow guards. He could hear sirens in the distance, which meant backup was coming. But it would still be several crucial minutes before they arrived. Those minutes would determine whether this situation ended peacefully or became a nightmare that would dominate headlines around the world. The other guards, following Marcus's lead, remained in position despite every instinct screaming at them to take cover or charge the gunman. Their trust in their captain was absolute, built through years of training and shared experiences. If Marcus believed that staying calm was the best strategy, they would follow his example, even with a loaded weapon pointed at them. The gunman seemed increasingly confused by their lack of reaction. He had clearly expected fear, panic, defensive movements that would justify his actions in his own mind. Instead, he faced a wall of professional calm that seemed to drain the energy from his desperate act. His shouts became more desperate, his demands less coherent as the reality of what he was doing began to sink in. Marcus could see the exact moment when doubt began to creep into the gunman's resolve. The man's eyes darted between the guards' faces, searching for some reaction that would validate his actions, but he found only steady, professional calm that made his weapon seem almost irrelevant. It was a masterclass in psychological de-escalation. It's played out before hundreds of witnesses who would never forget what they saw. As the standoff continued, Marcus began to notice crucial details about the gunman that others might have missed. The weapon, while real, showed signs of poor maintenance. The man's stance revealed someone unfamiliar with firearms, holding the pistol in a way that suggested desperation rather than training. Most importantly, Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out across the gunman's face as his initial adrenaline rush began to fade. The crowd had mostly cleared the immediate area, but many people remained at a distance, their phones capturing every moment of the confrontation. News crews would arrive soon, turning this already tense situation into a media spectacle. Marcus knew that how they handled the next few minutes would be analyzed and discussed for years to come, potentially setting precedents for how such situations should be managed, without breaking his stance or showing any sign of movement. His voice was steady, conversational, almost casual despite the weapon pointed at him. He didn't make demands or issue threats. Instead, he simply began talking to the gunman as one human being to another, acknowledging the man's obvious distress while projecting an aura of complete control over the situation. The effect was immediate and profound. The gunman's aggressive posture began to soften as Marcus's calm voice cut through his panic and rage. Other guards watched in amazement as their captain demonstrated textbook crisis negotiation techniques, turning what could have been a violent confrontation into something resembling a conversation. The weapon remained pointed at them, but its menace seemed to diminish with each passing moment. Marcus learned that the gunman's name was David, that he was unemployed, facing eviction, and had convinced himself that creating a dramatic scene would somehow solve his problems. His plan, such as it was, had involved making demands for money and attention. But facing the reality of armed guards who refused to react with fear had shattered his resolve. He was no longer a dangerous criminal, but a desperate man who had made a terrible mistake. The conversation continued for nearly 10 minutes. With Marcus gradually drawing out the man's story, while never once moving from his position or showing any sign of impatience, he acknowledged David's frustrations, validated his feelings of powerlessness, and slowly began to offer alternatives to the path he had chosen. It was psychology in action, human connection, overcoming desperation and fear. Behind them, tactical officers had quietly taken positions, but Marcus gestured subtly for them to remain back. He could sense that David was reaching a turning point, that the careful rapport they had built could be shattered by any sign of increased force or aggression. This was a moment that required patience and understanding rather than overwhelming tactical response. The breakthrough came when David began to cry. The weapon lowered slightly as exhaustion and emotional release overcame his artificial bravado. Marcus could see the exact moment when the man realized that his actions had been driven by despair rather than any real criminal intent. The transformation from dangerous gunman to broken human being was complete, and everyone present could feel the tension beginning to dissolve. Marcus took a careful step forward, still maintaining his calm demeanor, but now clearly taking control of the situation. His movement was slow, deliberate, non-threatening, designed to show David that he was safe to surrender without losing face. The crowd held its breath as they watched this delicate moment unfold, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing something extraordinary in human behavior and professional skill. The surrender happened gradually, then all at once. David's hand began to shake more violently as the full weight of his actions hit him. The weapon, which had seemed so important moments before, now felt heavy and foreign in his grip. Marcus continued talking, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of David's collapsing resolve. He spoke about second chances, about how everyone makes mistakes, about the possibility of getting help rather than making things worse. When David finally began to lower the gun, Marcus moved with careful precision. He extended his hand, palm up, in a gesture that was both commanding and compassionate. It was an invitation rather than a demand, offering David the chance to end this peacefully while maintaining some dignity. The gesture spoke volumes about Marcus's character and training, showing that even in crisis, he viewed the gunman as a human being deserving of respect. The moment when David placed the weapon in Marcus's hand was electric. The crowd, which had been holding its collective breath, released a sigh that could be heard across the courtyard. Cameras clicked frantically as journalists and tourists captured the image that would soon appear on front pages around the world. But for Marcus, it was simply the successful conclusion of a dangerous situation that could have ended tragically. As soon as the weapon was secured, Marcus's demeanor shifted subtly. He remained calm and professional, but now he was clearly in complete control. He spoke quietly to David, explaining what would happen next, preparing him for the arrest that had to follow. His words were kind but firm, helping the man understand that while the immediate crisis was over, there would still be consequences for his actions. The tactical officers moved in smoothly, but under Marcus's direction, they treated David with dignity rather than excessive force. This wasn't about punishment or dominance. It was about safely resolving a situation that had spiraled beyond one man's ability to control. Marcus's leadership in those final moments demonstrated that true strength sometimes comes from restraint rather than action. As David was led away, he turned back to Marcus with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with shame. He tried to speak, to apologize or explain, but Marcus simply nodded in acknowledgement. There would be time for words later, in courtrooms and counseling sessions. Right now, what mattered was that everyone was safe, and the situation had ended without violence. The crowd began to return cautiously, our excitement now mixed with awe at what they had witnessed. Children who had been crying in fear were now pointing at Marcus with admiration. Adults who had fled in panic returned to thank the guards for their professionalism. The ceremony that had been interrupted by crisis had somehow become something far more meaningful than routine: pageantry. Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. Slightly as he handed the weapon to the arriving investigators, his fellow guards clustered around him, their respect and admiration obvious in their expressions. They had all followed his lead without question, trusting his judgment even when it meant standing still while facing an armed threat. Their faith in his leadership had been completely vindicated. The media attention was immediate and intense. Reporters who had initially come to cover a routine ceremony now found themselves with a story that would resonate around the world. But Marcus deflected most questions, emphasizing that he had simply done his job and that the real story was about getting help for people who needed it, rather than celebrating any individual heroism. The aftermath of the incident brought unexpected challenges for Marcus. Within hours, video footage of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms worldwide. The image of the royal guard standing perfectly still while facing an armed gunman became an instant symbol of courage and professionalism. News outlets from dozens of countries requested interviews, and his superiors were fielding calls from government officials praising his handling of the situation. But Marcus found himself struggling with the sudden fame. He was a private person who had chosen his career specifically because it involved serving without seeking personal recognition. The constant attention felt overwhelming, particularly when reporters began digging into his personal life and military background. His quiet home life with his wife Sarah and their teenage daughter, Emma, was suddenly under scrutiny from strangers around the world. The most difficult aspect was the way some people wanted to turn him into a hero while completely ignoring David's situation. Marcus had received dozens of interview requests, but he noticed that very few journalists seemed interested in discussing mental health resources or the social problems that had driven David to such desperate measures. The focus remained on the dramatic confrontation rather than the underlying issues that had caused it. Sarah watched her husband struggle with the attention and recognized the signs of stress that his calm exterior couldn't completely hide. She had been married to Marcus for 15 years and knew that his greatest strength was also his greatest burden. His ability to remain calm under pressure meant that people often forgot he was human too, that even he needed support and understanding when dealing with traumatic events. Emma was proud of her father but also concerned about how the attention was affecting their family. Her friends at school treated her differently now, some seeking association with her newfound celebrity, others seeming intimidated by her father's sudden fame. She wished people could see what she saw, a dedicated man who helped people because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted recognition. The psychological evaluation that followed any use of force incident revealed something that surprised even Marcus himself. Despite his outward calm during the confrontation, his body had experienced significant stress. The counselor explained that his training had allowed him to function effectively while under extreme pressure. But that didn't mean the experience hadn't affected him. Processing traumatic events was important even for highly trained professionals. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus received a letter that changed his perspective entirely. It was from David, written from the mental health facility where he was receiving treatment. The letter was filled with gratitude and apology, but more importantly, it revealed how the kindness Marcus had shown during those crucial minutes had given David hope for the first time in months. The gentle way he had been treated during his surrender had convinced him to accept help rather than continue down a destructive UA's path. Reading that letter, Marcus finally understood why the incident had resonated with so many people around the world. It wasn't just about his professional skills or brave actions under pressure. It was about the power of treating others with dignity even in the worst circumstances. About choosing understanding over judgment. About recognizing humanity even in people who have made terrible mistakes. The letter also revealed that David had been struggling with depression and unemployment for over a year before the incident. His actions that day weren't those of a career criminal, but of a man who had lost all hope and couldn't see any other way to be heard. Marcus realized that while he had prevented a tragedy, the real victory was that David was now getting the help he needed to rebuild his life. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same courtyard where the incident had occurred, but everything felt different. The routine ceremony continued as it always had. Tourists gathered to watch and take photos. But now he carried a deeper understanding of his role and its impact. The experience had changed him in ways that weren't immediately visible, but ran deeper than his professional duties. The official recognition had been significant. Marcus received commendations from his superiors, a bravery award from the government, and invitations to speak at law enforcement conferences around the world. But the recognition that meant the most to him came from an unexpected source. David, now in recovery and working with a support program for people facing similar struggles, had asked to meet with Marcus to thank him personally. Their meeting was private, arranged through official channels, but kept away from media attention. David looked completely different from the desperate man Marcus had faced that morning months before. He was clean, healthy, and most importantly, hopeful about his future. He thanked Marcus not just for preventing tragedy, but for treating him like a human being worthy of compassion, even at his lowest moment. During their conversation, David revealed something that surprised Marcus. He said that the image of the guard standing calmly in the face of his weapon had haunted him in the best possible way. It had shown him what real strength looked like, how someone could face fear without becoming fearful, how professional duty could coexist with human kindness. It had given him a model for how he wanted to handle his own life challenges going forward. Marcus had been invited to speak at police, academies, and security conferences, sharing his experience and the lessons learned from that morning, but he always emphasized the same points: that de-escalation was more powerful than force, that seeing the humanity in others could prevent tragedies, and that sometimes the bravest action was simply remaining calm and treating people with dignity, even in dangerous situations. The story had inspired changes in training protocols for security forces around the world. The incident became a case study in crisis management, demonstrating how psychological approaches could be more effective than purely tactical responses. Training programs began incorporating more emphasis on communication skills and understanding the psychology of people in crisis situations. Home. Life had gradually returned to normal, though Marcus noticed that his family looked at him with even deeper respect than before. Emma had written a school essay about her father that brought tears to his eyes, describing how his example had taught her that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to do what's right despite being afraid. Sarah had supported him through the difficult months following the incident, understanding that processing such intense experiences took time even for someone with his training and experience. Their marriage had grown stronger as they worked through the challenges of sudden fame and the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. As Marcus watched the tourists gathering for another routine ceremony, he reflected on how a single morning had changed so many lives. His own perspective on his work had deepened. David had found hope and help instead of continuing down a destructive path. His fellow guards had learned valuable lessons about crisis management, and countless people around the world had been inspired by an example of professional courage and human compassion. The most profound change was in how Marcus viewed his role. He no longer saw himself as just a ceremonial guard or security officer. He understood now that every day brought opportunities to make a positive difference in people's lives, whether through dramatic intervention or simple acts of professionalism and kindness. The uniform represented not just tradition and duty, but the power to influence situations and people in ways that could echo far beyond any single moment. Standing at attention as the ceremony began, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that his actions mattered more than he had ever imagined, and that sometimes the greatest service came not from grand gestures, but from maintaining dignity, compassion, and calm professionalism, even when facing the unexpected challenges that life could present without warning.